In a kingdom where crowns were protected by pride and power, love was never meant to cross the lines of wealth and blood. But destiny has a strange way of choosing the most unlikely hearts. When a poor orphan girl met a prince who saw beyond poverty, a love story began that would shake the palace walls. Yet standing against them was a queen mother whose ambition knew no mercy. What followed was a battle between cruelty and compassion, one that would prove whether true love can survive the weight of a crown. This story is meant to open your eyes with happenings in some African royal kingdom. Watch this story with love, humility. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments section, hit the like button, and subscribe to this channel. And here we go. In the quiet village of Umuoka, where red earth roads curled lazily between tall palm trees and the evening breeze carried the comforting smell of roasting corn and burning firewood, lived a young orphan named Amara. Umuoka was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. The villagers shared laughter in the market square, gathered beneath moonlight for storytelling, and celebrated births, marriages, and harvests together. But for Amara, those joyful gatherings often felt like something she watched from the outside, not because the villagers hated her, but because she belonged to no one. Years earlier, when Amara was only 7 years old, a strange sickness swept through the village like a silent storm. People began falling ill, first with fever, then weakness. Some recovered, but many did not. Among those who never rose again were Amara's parents. Her father, Chike, had been a quiet farmer who believed in honest work. He spent his days cultivating cassava and yams on the small piece of land behind their home. Her mother, Adaeze, was known in the village for her warm laughter and gentle heart. She sold vegetables in the market and often shared food with neighbors who had little. Together, they had created a home filled with simple happiness. But sickness does not ask permission before it destroys a family. Within weeks, both of them were gone. The day the villagers buried them beneath the great udala tree outside the village, Amara felt as if the world had turned cold. She remembered standing beside the grave, her small fingers clutching the edge of her faded dress, watching as red earth covered the wooden coffins. She did not cry loudly. The tears simply rolled down her cheeks in quiet confusion. "Where will I sleep tonight?" she had whispered to an elderly woman nearby. The woman sighed sadly. No one answered. From that day forward, Amara learned a truth that many children never have to face so early in life. When you have no parents, the world becomes a harder place to survive. For a while, distant relatives took turns letting her sleep in their homes. But poverty was common in Umuoka, and mouths were already many. Soon, the quiet understanding formed among the villagers that Amara would have to fend for herself. Fortunately, her father had left behind a small mud house at the edge of the village. It was not much. The roof was made of rusting zinc sheets that rattled during strong winds. One corner of the wall had cracked after many seasons of rain. During storms, water often dripped through tiny holes in the ceiling. But to Amara, it was precious, because it was the last place where her parents' voices still seemed to echo in memory. Every morning before sunrise, Amara woke to the distant crowing of roosters. She swept the small compound with a dry palm broom. Then she walked nearly half a mile to the village stream, carrying a clay pot balanced carefully on her head. The path to the stream wound through thick grasses and scattered mango trees. Early mist often clung to the ground, and the air smelled fresh with dew. Other women and girls usually gathered there, chatting and laughing as they filled their containers with water. But Amara was quiet, not shy, just thoughtful. After fetching water, she hurried to the village market, hoping to find small jobs that would earn her food for the day. Sometimes she helped old women arrange vegetables. Sometimes she carried heavy baskets for traders arriving from neighboring villages. Other times, she swept dusty stalls or washed plates in roadside food stands. The payment was never money. Often it was just a small bowl of gadi, a handful of roasted groundnuts, or leftover soup. But Amara never complained. She had learned that gratitude was often the difference between survival and starvation. What surprised many villagers was that despite the hardships surrounding her life, Amara remained remarkably kind. If an old woman struggled to lift a basket, Amara helped without being asked. If a crying child got lost in the market, Amara comforted them until their mother returned.
Even stray animals seemed drawn to her gentle presence. Once, a wounded puppy limped into her compound during a heavy rainstorm. Amara cleaned its injured leg and fed it scraps of food until it healed. From that day on, the small brown dog followed her everywhere. She named it Nkem, which meant my own, because for the first time since losing her parents, Amara felt like something in the world belonged to her again. Still, loneliness visited her often, especially at night. When darkness settled over Umoka and families gathered inside their homes for dinner, laughter and conversation drifted through the village air. Amara sat alone outside her hut, watching the glow of lanterns through distant windows. Sometimes she imagined what it might feel like to sit at a table with parents again, to hear her mother calling her name, to hear her father telling stories after a long day of farming. Instead, she often ate quietly beneath the open sky. Above her stretched a blanket of stars. Those stars became her silent companions. On many nights, Amara whispered to them, "Mother, Father." Her voice was soft, almost carried away by the wind. "I am trying to be strong." Tears would gather in her eyes as memories surfaced, her mother braiding her hair, her father lifting her onto the shoulders during village festivals. "I hope you can see me." The small dog, Nkem, usually curled beside her feet, sensing the sadness in her voice. Sometimes Amara wiped her tears quickly and forced herself to smile, because she had made a promise to herself long ago, a promise she repeated whenever life felt too heavy. "No matter how hard the world becomes, I will not let my heart become bitter." Many people who faced such hardship grew angry. Some became cruel, but Amara refused to allow pain to change who she was. Instead, she chose kindness, even when no one noticed, even when no one thanked her. And perhaps that quiet strength was the very thing destiny had been waiting for.
Because far beyond the dusty roads of Umuoka, in a palace of marble pillars and golden gates, a young prince was beginning to question the life he had always known.
He had wealth. He had power. He had servants who obeyed his every command. Yet something inside him felt incomplete. And very soon, fate would guide his footsteps to the small village of Umuoka, to the girl who had nothing in the world except the kind of heart that could change a kingdom. Far from the humble mud houses of Umuoka village stood the magnificent royal palace of Obiota Kingdom. It was a place built not merely for living, but for power. Tall stone walls surrounded the palace like a silent army guarding ancient secrets. Massive iron gates stood at the entrance, watched day and night by armed royal guards. Inside, wide courtyards opened into grand halls decorated with carved pillars, colorful tapestries, and polished marble floors that reflected the glow of hanging chandeliers. Servants moved quietly through long corridors carrying trays of food, folded garments, and polished silverware. Musicians played gentle melodies during royal dingers, and every morning, officials, chiefs, and advisors gathered to discuss matters that shaped the kingdom's future. In the center of this world of privilege lived Prince Obina Chidubem, the only son of King Namdi of Obiota. From the day he was born, the kingdom celebrated him. Drums were beaten across villages, cannon shots echoed across the hills. People sang songs praising the arrival of the boy who would one day wear the royal crown. But while the kingdom saw him as a future ruler, Obina often felt like a bird inside a golden cage. His childhood was filled with tutors, guards, and endless lessons about leadership. He learned diplomacy, he studied history, he trained in combat and strategy. Every moment of his life had been carefully planned by palace advisors who believed a prince should grow into a perfect king. Yet something in Obina's heart longed for something different. Freedom. Not the freedom of power, but the freedom of ordinary life. He had watched from palace balconies as villagers came and went through the capital city, laughing, bargaining in markets, carrying baskets, telling stories under mango trees. They looked tired sometimes, but they also looked alive. Their lives seemed real in a way palace life did not. Inside the palace, everyone spoke carefully, everyone bowed, everyone obeyed. But beyond the palace gates, people spoke honestly. And that honesty fascinated the young prince. One evening, when he was 19 years old, Obina stood beside the palace window, looking down at the busy streets of the capital. His closest childhood friend and royal guard, Ikenna, noticed the distant look in his eyes. "You are thinking again," Ikenna said. Obina smiled faintly. "Tell me something, Ikenna." "Yes, my prince." "Do you ever wonder how our people truly live?" Ikenna frowned slightly. "My prince, we see them every day." Obina shook his head. "No, we see them as rulers see them, from above, from far away." He turned away from the window. "I want to know them as they truly are." Ikenna raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to do that?" Obina's eyes sparkled with quiet determination. "I will walk among them." The guard looked shocked. "That is dangerous." "But it is necessary." Within days, the prince began doing something no royal advisor would ever approve. He left the palace in disguise. Instead of wearing expensive royal garments, he dressed in simple clothes like an ordinary young man.
He covered his hair with a small cap and walked through villages without royal escorts or palace announcements. To the world outside, he became simply Obi, a traveler curious about the kingdom. At first, Ikenna followed him secretly from a distance, ensuring no harm came to the prince. But as weeks passed and nothing dangerous happened, even the guard began to relax. Obina visited many villages. He sat beside farmers and listened to their complaints about poor harvests. He drank palm wine with old men who told stories about the kingdom's past. He watched children chase each other through dusty fields while laughing freely. These experiences filled him with a strange joy he had never felt inside palace walls. For the first time, he felt connected to the people he was meant to rule someday. But destiny had planned something even greater than understanding. It had planned love. One bright morning, Obina decided to explore a village he had never visited before. The road led him toward Umooka. The village market was already alive when he arrived. Women spread colorful cloth on the ground, displaying peppers, tomatoes, dried fish, and cassava. Traders called out loudly, competing for customers. Children ran between stalls, chasing each other with playful shouts. Smoke from cooking fires drifted into the air. Obina walked slowly through the crowd, observing everything with quiet fascination. That was when he noticed her. She stood beside an elderly woman's stall, arranging vegetables into neat baskets. Her wrapper was faded from years of washing. Her blouse had been carefully mended at the sleeve, yet something about her presence made the noisy market seem suddenly calm. Her movements were gentle, her smile was warm, and when she laughed softly at something the old woman said, the sound carried a sweetness that caught the prince completely off guard. Obina stopped walking. For a moment, he simply watched. Not because of her beauty, though she was beautiful in a quiet, natural way, but because of the peace that seemed to surround her. She looked like someone who had known hardship, yet refused to let it harden her heart. Curious, Obina approached the stall. The elderly woman greeted him first. "Young man, buy fresh tomatoes." But his eyes had already found the girl. She looked up. For a brief second their eyes met. Something passed between them, something neither of them could fully explain. Amara quickly lowered her gaze, slightly embarrassed by the stranger's attention. "How much is the basket of tomatoes?" Obina asked. Her voice was soft when she answered. 500 naira. He did not actually need tomatoes, but he bought them anyway. When he reached into his pocket to pay, he realized something strange. He felt nervous. The prince who had addressed royal courts without fear suddenly struggled to form simple sentences. "Do you work here every day?" he asked. Amara nodded politely. "Yes." The conversation ended quickly after that, but something inside Obina refused to let the moment fade. The next day, he returned. This time, he bought peppers. The day after that, he bought cassava. Soon, the elderly woman began laughing whenever she saw him approach. "You must love vegetables very much, young man," she teased. Amara tried not to smile, but she often failed. Gradually, their conversations grew longer. They spoke about village life, about dreams, about simple memories from childhood. Obina never revealed that he was a prince.
To Amara, he was simply Obi, a thoughtful stranger who listened more than he spoke.
and Amara found herself enjoying his company. Not because he brought gifts, not because he tried to impress her, but because when he spoke to her, he looked at her as if she truly mattered. Weeks turned into months. The prince found himself visiting Umuoka more frequently than any other village. He began inventing excuses to leave the palace. Each journey meant another chance to see her smile, another chance to hear her voice. What neither of them realized was that something delicate and powerful had begun growing between them. Something that cared nothing about wealth, nothing about royal blood, nothing about social status. It was simply love. But love between a prince and an orphan was not a simple story. Because far away in the palace, someone had begun noticing the prince's unusual absences. And the moment she discovered the truth, the peaceful world Amara knew would begin to crumble. Within the towering walls of the Obiora royal palace, power did not always speak loudly. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it watched, and sometimes it waited patiently for the right moment to strike. At the center of that silent authority stood Queen Mother Ifunanya. Even among royalty, her presence commanded attention. She was not merely the king's wife. Over the years, she had become something far more powerful, the guardian of the royal bloodline. Tall and elegant, Queen Ifunanya carried herself with a dignity that made people lower their eyes in respect whenever she entered a room. Her voice was calm, but every word she spoke carried the weight of authority. Servants feared disappointing her. Advisors feared contradicting her. Even powerful chiefs chose their words carefully in her presence. For decades, she had protected the royal family's reputation with fierce determination. She believed in one thing above all else: royal blood must never mix with weakness. The Obiora throne in her mind was sacred. Kings married daughters of noble houses. Princes married women whose families carried power and influence. That was the way things had always been. And as long as Queen Ifunanya lived, she intended to keep it that way. But recently, something had begun troubling her. Her son, Prince Obina, had been behaving differently. At first, it was subtle. The prince began leaving the palace more frequently. He skipped some royal meetings. He returned late in the evenings with dust on his shoes and a strange quietness in his eyes. Queen Ifunanya noticed everything. She always did. One afternoon, she sat in her private chamber sipping herbal tea while listening to palace reports. A palace guard knelt before her. "Your Majesty," the guard said carefully, "the prince left the palace again this morning." Her gaze sharpened slightly. "Where did he go?" "We do not know, Your Majesty." The queen's fingers paused on the cup. "You do not know?" The guard swallowed nervously. "He travels without royal escort, disguised." For a moment, the room became silent. Queen Ifunanya slowly placed the cup on the table. Her voice dropped to a colder tone. "Find out where he goes." The guard bowed immediately. "Yes, Your Majesty." Within the palace, information moved quickly when the Queen Mother commanded it. Spies were sent quietly across nearby villages. Servants began asking careful questions, and within days, the truth reached her ears. One evening, her trusted advisor, Chief Okafor, entered her chamber with a troubled expression. He bowed deeply.
"My queen, what have you discovered?" she asked calmly. The chief hesitated. "The prince has been visiting Umuoka village regularly, and he spends time with a young woman there." Queen Ifunanya's eyes narrowed. What kind of woman? Chief Okafor spoke slowly. An orphan. The word hung in the air like an insult. The Queen Mother's lips tightened. An orphan? Yes, Your Majesty. What is her name? Amara. For several long seconds, Queen Ifunanya said nothing. But inside her chest, anger had begun to rise like fire beneath calm water. Her son, the future king of Obiora, spending time with a poor orphan girl from a village? To her, it was unthinkable, an embarrassment, a threat. Tell me everything about this girl, she demanded. And so the investigation deepened. Spies returned with detailed reports. They observed Amara in the market. They watched her helping old women. They followed her through the village paths. Every report described the same thing. She is humble. She works hard. The villagers respect her. She lives alone in a small mud house. But the more Queen Ifunanya heard about the girl, the less sympathy she felt. To her, those qualities did not matter. What mattered was status. What mattered was bloodline. What mattered was power. And Amara possessed none of those things. In the Queen Mother's eyes, the girl represented danger. Not because she was evil, but because she had the power to capture the prince's heart. And a prince whose heart was controlled by love could become a weak king. One evening, Queen Ifunanya walked through the palace garden while thinking deeply. Tall hedges lined the stone pathways. Royal guards stood quietly at a distance. Chief Okafor walked beside her. "My queen," he said carefully, "the prince appears very fond of this girl." She stopped walking. Fond. The word irritated her. "Fondness can be corrected," she said coldly. "But love—" Chief Okafor began. The queen turned sharply. "My son will not fall in love with a girl who has nothing." The chief lowered his gaze respectfully. "What do you wish to do, Your Majesty?" Queen Ifunanya resumed walking slowly. The soft sound of her footsteps echoed on the stone path. "I will end this foolishness before it grows into something dangerous." Later that night, she summoned 2 palace guards and a royal investigator. The room was dimly lit by lanterns. Their shadows flickered against the walls. Queen Ifunanya sat on a carved wooden chair, her posture straight and commanding. "You will travel to Umuoka," she instructed them. "Yes, Your Majesty. You will watch the girl named Amara." They nodded. "And if you discover that she is trying to manipulate my son," her voice became colder, "you will ensure she disappears from his life." The investigator hesitated slightly. "Your Majesty, do you mean—" The queen lifted a hand, stopping him. "I did not say kill her." Her eyes hardened. "But the prince must never see her again." The guards bowed deeply. "As you command." As they left the chamber, Queen Ifunanya remained seated, staring into the darkness. She believed she was protecting her son, protecting the throne, protecting the kingdom. But power sometimes blinds even the wisest rulers. Because while she saw Amara as a threat, she did not yet understand the strength of the girl she was preparing to destroy. Meanwhile, far away in Umuoka village, Amara finished her work in the market and began walking home beneath the warm orange glow of sunset. She had no idea that spies were already watching her. She had no idea that powerful forces were moving against her. And she certainly had no idea that the simple love growing between her and the prince had just awakened the wrath of the most powerful woman in the kingdom. The storm had begun, and soon it would reach her door. The sun rose gently over Umuoka village, spreading golden light across the red earth roads and thatched rooftops. For Amara, the morning began like every other. She swept the small compound in front of her mud house, while her little dog, Nkem, wagged its tail beside her. The air smelled of fresh dew and wood smoke from nearby kitchens where women prepared early meals. Life in the village moved slowly, peacefully,
Yet, hidden beneath that peaceful rhythm, something dark had begun to move. Unseen eyes were watching. Queen Mother Ifunanya's spies had already arrived in Umuoka. They blended easily among traders, travelers, and strangers passing through the market. To the villagers, they looked like ordinary visitors. But they were there for only one reason: Amara. For days they observed her quietly. They watched her help an old woman carry cassava. They saw her share food with a hungry child. They noticed how she greeted everyone with respect. And strangely, the more they watched her, the more uneasy some of them felt. Because she did not look like someone trying to deceive a prince. She looked like someone simply trying to survive. Still, they had their orders, and orders from the Queen Mother were not to be questioned. Soon the first part of the cruel plan began. One afternoon in the market, whispers suddenly appeared like smoke in the wind. "Have you heard about that orphan girl? They say she has been meeting a wealthy man secretly. I heard she is trying to trap him into marriage. Some girls will do anything to escape poverty." At first, Amara did not notice. She was busy helping arrange vegetables for the elderly trader she worked with. But gradually, she began to feel something strange. People were looking at her differently. Two women standing nearby whispered while staring at her. A man shook his head disapprovingly as she passed. Even children giggled behind her back. Amara's heart felt confused. "What is happening?" she asked the old woman quietly. The elderly trader sighed. "Rumors, my child." "Rumors?" The woman hesitated. "They say you are trying to trap a rich man." Amara's eyes widened in disbelief. "Trap?" The old woman shrugged sadly. "People talk when they do not understand." Amara felt a sharp pain inside her chest. She had never tried to deceive anyone. She had never even asked Obi for money or gifts. All she had done was enjoy his company. Yet now the village that once treated her kindly was beginning to turn cold. That evening, when Prince Obina arrived as usual, he immediately noticed something was wrong. Amara's smile was weaker than usual. "Are you all right?" he asked. She forced a small smile. "Yes." But Obina sensed the sadness hiding behind her calm voice. He gently touched her hand. "You can tell me." For a moment Amara hesitated, then she whispered, "People are saying things about me." The prince's brow tightened. "What things?" "That I am trying to trap a wealthy man." Obina felt anger rise inside him. "Who said that?" Amara shook her head.
"It doesn't matter." But it mattered to him, very much. For the first time since their friendship began, Obina felt the heavy weight of his hidden identity. If he told the truth about who he was, the rumors might stop. But revealing himself could also bring danger to Amara. Before he could decide what to say, footsteps approached behind them. 3 unfamiliar men stood nearby. They wore the clothing of palace guards. Obina's heart sank. The men looked directly at Amara. "Are you the girl named Amara?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." The leader of the guards spoke firmly. "You are required to come with us." Amara's confusion deepened. "Why?" "You are accused of stealing royal property." The words struck like thunder. "What?" Amara whispered. "I have stolen nothing." But the guards did not listen. They grabbed her arms. Prince Obina stepped forward immediately. "Stop!" The guards froze when they recognized him. "My prince!" Obina's voice turned sharp. "Release her." The guards hesitated nervously. "Our orders come from the Queen Mother." The moment he heard those words, Obina understood everything. His mother had discovered the truth, and this was her response. He clenched his fists. "You cannot arrest her without proof." The guard bowed slightly. "We only follow orders, my prince." Before Obina could stop them, they dragged Amara away. Her frightened eyes searched his face. "Obi!" But the guards pulled her into a waiting carriage. Within minutes, they were gone. Leaving behind a cloud of dust,
and a prince whose heart was suddenly filled with dread. By nightfall, Amara found herself inside the royal palace dungeon. The cold stone walls trapped the damp smell of darkness. A small barred window near the ceiling allowed only a thin line of moonlight to enter. The iron door slammed shut behind her with a heavy echo. She sat slowly on the cold floor, trembling. Confusion filled her mind. Why had this happened? What had she done wrong? The silence of the cell felt suffocating. Meanwhile, Prince Obina stormed through the palace corridors like a man possessed. Servants stepped aside in fear as he passed. He burst into the Queen Mother's chamber without waiting for permission. Queen Ifunanya sat calmly at a table reading palace reports. She did not even look surprised. "You imprisoned Amara," Obina said, his voice shaking with anger. The queen closed the document slowly. "Yes. She is innocent. She is beneath you." The words were spoken calmly, but they struck harder than any insult. Obina stared at his mother in disbelief. "You had no right to do this." "I have every right," she replied. "I am protecting the future king." Obina's chest rose and fell with emotion. "You are destroying someone who has done nothing wrong." Queen Ifunanya stood slowly. "You are blinded by affection." "No," Obina said firmly, "I am guided by love." For the first time in years, mother and son stood on opposite sides of a battle neither could easily win. Queen Ifunanya's eyes hardened. "A prince does not marry an orphan." Obina lifted his chin. "I love her." The room fell silent. Even the palace servants outside the door held their breath. Queen Ifunanya studied her son carefully. Then she spoke again, her voice colder than before. "If you truly love her," she paused, "then we will test that love." Obina frowned. "What do you mean?" The queen turned away slightly.
"Tomorrow, the girl will stand before the royal court. And if her love is true, she will prove it."
But deep inside her mind, the Queen Mother believed something else entirely. She believed the test she had planned would break Amara completely, because cruelty, when wielded by power, often expects the powerless to surrender. What she did not yet realize was that Amara's heart carried a strength no palace walls could imprison. Morning arrived slowly over the kingdom of Obiora, but inside the royal palace, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. News had already spread across the capital. A young orphan girl from a distant village would stand before the royal court. The reason was whispered in corridors and markets alike. The girl had captured the heart of the prince, and the Queen Mother intended to end it. By mid-morning, the grand court hall was filled. Tall pillars carved with ancient symbols stretched toward the high ceiling. Golden curtains hung behind the royal throne. The polished marble floor reflected the glow of large oil lamps placed along the walls. Ministers, chiefs, and palace advisors sat in their designated seats. Royal guards stood like statues near the doors. Even a few respected villagers had been allowed to witness the proceedings. At the far end of the hall stood the royal throne, where King Inandi sat in quiet authority. Beside him stood Queen Mother Ifunanya, her face calm and unreadable. Prince Obina stood nearby, his expression tense. He had not slept the entire night. His thoughts had remained trapped inside the dark dungeon where Amara waited. Every moment felt like a slow torment. Then the heavy court doors opened. 2 guards escorted Amara inside. The hall fell silent immediately. She walked slowly between rows of powerful men and women whose eyes studied her carefully. Her clothes were simple, her hair slightly disheveled from the night spent in the cold cell. Yet despite her exhaustion, there was something remarkable about the way she carried herself. She did not walk like a criminal. She walked like someone who refused to let fear control her dignity. Prince Obina's heart tightened when he saw her. He wanted to run to her, to hold her, to tell her everything would be all right.
but royal protocol held him in place. Amara finally reached the center of the court and stopped. The guards stepped aside. Queen Mother Ifunanya's voice broke the silence. "You are the girl called Amara." "Yes, Your Majesty," Amara replied softly. "You have been spending time with my son." Amara glanced briefly at Obina. Then she answered honestly. "Yes." A murmur moved through the hall. The queen continued. "You are aware that he is the future king of this kingdom." Amara lowered her eyes respectfully. "Yes." "And yet," the queen said slowly, "you still allowed his attention." The accusation hung heavily in the air. Amara's heart trembled, but her voice remained gentle. "I did not seek his attention, Your Majesty." Queen Ifunanya studied her closely. "And yet he gave it to you." Amara said nothing, because she knew the truth was complicated. Love rarely begins with plans or intentions. It simply grows where two hearts meet. The Queen Mother stepped forward slightly. "You claim to care for the prince." Amara hesitated. Then she answered with honesty that surprised many in the court. "Yes."
"What must I prove?" Amara asked carefully. Queen Ifunanya raised her hand slightly. "You have two choices." She paused to let the tension grow. "First, you may leave this kingdom forever." The words shocked many listeners. "You will never see the prince again," the queen continued. "You will never speak to him again." Her eyes sharpened. "But you will be free." Then she spoke the second option. "Or," Amara's heart began beating faster, "you may remain and face a trial." "A trial?" Amara whispered. "Yes." The queen's voice grew colder. "A test that will reveal whether your love is true or merely ambition." Prince Obina stepped forward immediately. "This is unnecessary." But the queen lifted her hand. "Silence." Even the prince could not openly challenge royal authority during court proceedings. Obina clenched his fists helplessly. Amara stood quietly. Her mind struggled to process everything. Leave forever, or risk a trial designed by the Queen Mother. She understood something important in that moment. This trial was not meant to be fair. It was meant to break her. The queen expected fear. She expected tears. She expected the orphan girl to collapse under pressure. But instead, Amara slowly lifted her head. Her eyes moved across the hall until they found Prince Obina. He looked heartbroken, trapped between love and royal duty. In that moment, Amara realized something painful. If she stayed, she might destroy his future. If she fought the queen, she might turn the kingdom against him. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "I choose to leave." The entire hall gasped. Even the Queen Mother blinked in surprise. Prince Obina felt the words strike his chest like a blade.
"No," he whispered. But Amara continued speaking. "I never wanted a crown," she said softly. Her voice trembled slightly as emotion filled the room. "I never wanted power or wealth." She looked at the queen. "I only loved him because he treated me like I mattered." Some of the chiefs exchanged thoughtful glances. Amara turned slowly toward the prince. "You were kind to me when the world ignored me." A tear slipped down her cheek. "For that, I will always be grateful." Then she took a deep breath. "You can keep the palace," she said gently to the queen. "You can keep the wealth." Her voice softened even more. "But you cannot force the heart to stop loving." Silence filled the hall. Even Queen Ifunanya seemed momentarily stunned. Amara bowed respectfully. Then she turned and began walking toward the great doors of the court. Prince Obina felt as though the ground beneath him had vanished. He stepped forward desperately. "Amara!" But royal guards blocked his path. And so the woman he loved walked away, not defeated, not humiliated, but with a quiet dignity that no power could crush. As the doors closed behind her, murmurs began rising across the hall. Many of the chiefs were deeply moved. Even some palace advisors wiped their eyes. Finally, King Namdi, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, slowly stood from his throne. The room instantly fell quiet. His voice carried the calm authority of a ruler who had watched many human dramas unfold during his lifetime. A woman who chooses love over power, he paused thoughtfully, is a woman who understands the true meaning of loyalty. Queen Ifunanya turned toward him in surprise. "My king," but he raised his hand gently. She walked away from the throne willingly. His eyes moved across the court. That kind of heart cannot be bought with crowns. He looked toward the guards. "Bring the girl back." Moments later, Amara was escorted inside again. Confusion filled her eyes. King Nnamdi smiled warmly. "My son." Prince Obina stepped forward quickly. The king placed a small royal ring into his hand. "Some crowns are inherited," the king said, "but some are earned by character." He nodded toward Amara. "If love like hers cannot sit beside the throne," his voice became stronger, "then perhaps the throne itself is unworthy." Tears filled Prince Obina's eyes. He walked toward Amara and gently took her hand. Before the entire court, he placed the royal ring on her finger. Cheers slowly rose through the hall. What had begun as a trial had ended as a victory, not of power, but of love. And so the orphan girl who once slept alone beneath the stars of Umuwaka village became Princess Amara of Obiora Kingdom, not because of blood, not because of wealth, but because a heart that refuses bitterness is the greatest crown of all.
For sometimes the greatest victory is not winning a throne, but proving that love, when genuine, cannot be silenced by fear, pride, or cruelty. Thank you for watching this incredible story. Kindly share your thoughts on the comments section, hit the like button, share to your family and friends, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel.